Have you ever wondered why we're so attracted to bad guys, and villains, and anti-heroes? I mean, we're endlessly fascinated by stories about outlaws. And I don't just mean ethical outlaws like Robin Hood, stealing from the rich, giving to the poor, that kind of thing. No, I mean flat-out criminals like Jesse James and John Dillinger and through to Al Capone and Pablo Escobar. We love stories about gangsters. And think about it, The Godfather is one of the most beloved movies of all time. Then, of course, you have the modern classic Scarface, although I don't think I can really refer to it as a modern classic anymore. Jesus, it's been almost 40 years. Bloody hell, I'm old. More recently, we have actual modern classics, Tony Soprano from The Sopranos. We have Breaking Bad's Walter White. And these guys, they're not just anti-heroes. They're actual villains. They just happen to be villains in stories where we like their enemies even less. And why are we so captivated by these bad people? I guess, first of all, just like with our actual heroes, with anti-heroes, there's an element of wish fulfillment. We want to be them because these are characters that take control of their lives. They don't surrender to their environment, they shape it. And that's what Superman has in common with Pablo Escobar. They both exercise power, they both fight back. Superman fights back against injustice, Pablo Escobar fights back against the government. But still, power fantasy doesn't cover everything. I mean, even a rapist exercises power over his victims, right? Or a wife beater, or Hitler, they all exert power over someone. But we don't identify with them. So there's got to be something more going on here than just the desire for raw power. I mean, what is it that makes us identify with an anti-hero and not with Jack the Ripper? I think the thing is that at the end of the day, we don't really want to see ourselves as the bad guys. And so even with anti-heroes, there needs to be some kind of redeeming quality. Or maybe just redeeming about the way these anti-heroes are portrayed. Maybe it's just a tragic backstory that humanizes the anti-hero, or it's a motivation that we can get behind, like with Black Panther's Killmonger. He's an asshole, but we sympathize with him because his motives are something that we can get behind. And then you have these outlaws like Jesse James and John Dillinger. They're criminals, but they're commonly depicted as upright, as honorable people. So we can get behind that. And then you've got a character like Dexter, right? He's a serial killer, literally one of the worst things you can be, but he has a code. He only kills villains. So there's a redeeming feature there. But there's another aspect here. All of these outlaws, these gangsters, these sympathetic serial killers, they're all up against an adversary that's far more powerful than them and that has far more resources than they have, the government. It's a David and Goliath situation. Our sympathetic outlaws, they've got that underdog shine, and we love underdogs. So what we have with these charismatic villains is a power fantasy and some kind of redeeming feature that makes them somewhat relatable. But the character I want to talk about today defies this categorization because he's hugely popular. We're talking one of pop culture's greatest icons. He's got more books, more movies, and more shows written about him than pretty much any other character in human history. Yet despite his popularity, this character isn't an anti-hero. He's a straight-up villain, completely corrupt, no redeeming features whatsoever. You could say he's almost synonymous with pure evil. And he's not an underdog either. Not only is he way more powerful than his enemies, he's also more powerful than the laws of nature itself. I'm talking about Count Dracula. Now take a minute to think about how weird Dracula's enduring popularity is. There really is no one else like him. And we're talking about a villainous monster entirely devoted to the destruction of innocent life. Yet he's a major object of fascination and even desire. Because unlike, say, Jack the Ripper, we kind of want to be Dracula, and we definitely want to shag Dracula. And it wasn't always like this. See, Dracula didn't start off as a sexy villain. Originally, he was a monster. But among Dracula's many powers, he's also a shapeshifter. And just like he can morph into a bat or a wolf or a mist, his character also has a unique ability to evolve to reflect the social and moral concerns of the time. So since he first appeared in Bram Stoker's novel in 1897, Dracula's transformed so many times, taken on so many new qualities and new powers and new motivations. Every different version has influenced the ones that came after. And the trend, the direction of this evolution has been pretty clear. Dracula's gone from monster to sex symbol. But before I take a closer look at that transformation, I just want to say a few words about why I'm talking about Dracula today. When we're talking Dracula, we're talking real pop culture A-list, triple A-list. I mean, who's as big as Dracula, really? Whose name is as recognizable in any country? From child to grandmother, you can ask anyone and they know who you're talking about. I mean, you can count characters like that on one hand. You've got Superman, you've got Batman, you've got James Bond, maybe Sherlock Holmes, and then you've got Dracula. And yeah, there's a bunch of other biggies. Some of them, they're not quite as popular as they used to be, like Tarzan or Zorro or Frankenstein. You got some of the classic Disney and Looney Tunes characters, with Mickey Mouse and Bugs Bunny. Or you got characters that are that big, but they just haven't endured as long, like Darth Vader or Homer Simpson. And I'm always interested in that. I'm interested in pop culture icons because, well, I guess the key word here is culture. These characters are products of our culture, so they speak to the desires and the ambitions and the fears of the societies that produce them. They tell us something about ourselves. And the characters like Dracula that have been successful for so long, I mean, we're now in his 3rd century. These characters, they possess some universal characteristic, I guess, that transcends their original time. So while they can keep adapting to represent changing societal issues, they also tell us something about ourselves that remains the same, that remains true over time. So what I'm saying is, pop culture characters, the really important ones, they matter. The same way that Achilles and Odysseus and Hamlet matter. Maybe more.